In the summer of 1981, NBC's Tomorrow Coast to Coast pulled off one of the most controversial true crime interviews in television history. Journalist Tom Snyder, known for his blunt, sometimes confrontational style, sat face to face with Charles Manson inside California's Vacaville State Prison. Snyder's program had a loyal following, but this was different. This was Charles Manson, the most notorious inmate in America, the man who allegedly killed flower power and the 60s, a symbol of American fear and fascination, being handed a prime-time microphone. Before the cameras rolled, Snyder addressed journalists in NBC's Manhattan studios, fielding questions like, "Why give airtime to that son of a bitch?" But the execs gave in, and it worked. The broadcast drew a staggering 22 million viewers. It was a media sensation. The public couldn't look away. During the segment, Manson alternated between detachment, rage, and a weird sort of showmanship. Snyder tried to corner him with questions about remorse, about guilt, about giving orders to kill.
I just wrote a letter.
Judge didn't say that you were innocent, Charles.
Innocent?
Let's go back to your mother.
Innocent?
What else?
Wait a minute. Let's get back to that word, innocent.
Snyder didn't get the fireworks he had hoped for. Sure, Manson was chaotic, and sure, nobody could look away. But Snyder was hoping for a headline confession, a breakdown, a TV moment that would go down in infamy. Instead, he got what most interviewers got from Manson: cryptic babble, evasion, flashes of performance. Still, even that was enough to boost ratings and Snyder's own reputation. Because whether you loved or hated Manson, you watched. So how did this notorious television event even happen? That takes us back to a man named Newell Emmons. Emmons was no random journalist. Back in the 1950s, he'd actually done time in prison with Manson, and then decades later reappeared in Charlie's orbit, pitching a story. Emmons carried with him a promise of authenticity, that he could get inside Manson's head like no one else. He reestablished contact with Charlie in the late 1970s after Manson had been convicted and offered him a way to be heard. To bring the project to television, Emmons then approached NBC with a proposal. He asked for $10,000, a huge sum at the time. What exactly was that money for? In part to grease the wheels for the interview with Manson, and in part to secure exclusive future book rights with Charlie. Now, why didn't NBC just give the money to Manson? Because of the civil lawsuit filed by Bartek Frykowski, son of Wojtek Frykowski, one of the victims slaughtered at Cielo Drive. That judgment prohibited Manson and all of his co-defendants from directly profiting off their crimes. That same civil ruling is why Susan Atkins and Tex Watson had to donate proceeds from their own co-written memoirs to Christian charities a few years before. The Frykowski lawsuit, still partly on the books today, meant Charlie couldn't pocket money freely. So Emmons' $10,000 may have been a creative workaround, a consultation fee, to book the interview and get the actual book moving. Over the next few years, Emmons gathered Manson's stories for the book that would become Manson in his own words, published in 1986. But his process was far from perfect. Prison officials refused to let him bring paper, pens, or any kind of recording device into their meetings. So after each conversation with Manson, Emmons ran out to his car and scribbled down everything he could remember. That left a wide margin for speculation, which critics would attack later. But back to the interview itself. While Emmons was lining up his book, the person who helped coordinate the TV appearance was none other than Roger Ailes, then a rising NBC producer, years before he founded Fox News. Ailes paid Emmons that $10,000 fee to lock down access and negotiated with Manson through Emmons, acting as Charlie's informal spokesperson. It was Ailes' master stroke of publicity. Controversial, messy, ratings gold. Ailes himself would go on to even greater infamy. In 1996, he created Fox News Network, redefining American political media with hard-edged commentary and a controlling grip on messaging. But his legacy was stained by scandal. In 2016, Ailes resigned from Fox after multiple women accused him of sexual harassment, manipulation, and abuse of power, revealing a predatory culture he had fostered for years. It was the same ruthless instinct that had made him hungry enough in 1981 to put Charles Manson on primetime television. After Manson, in his own words, was published, Emmons and Manson did a mini press tour of sorts. Journalists were invited to Vacaville to speak with them, publicizing the book as the most honest account of Charlie's life. Manson gave quotes, showed up on cue, and seemed to endorse the whole project. He called Emmons his mouthpiece, letting him speak the so-called truth that Charlie claimed no one else would. But as time passed, Manson began to hedge. He started telling friends, prison visitors, and even a few journalists that Emmons had made things up or twisted his words. He never specifically pointed to any single story he wanted to correct. He never issued a statement saying, "I disavow this book." He simply let a haze of doubt settle over the narrative. Maybe that was the point. Because the truth is, Charlie had already benefited from the publicity, from the interviews, from the renewed spotlight, and most likely, in part, from the $10,000. If he later regretted talking too much, or worried he'd revealed something he shouldn't, it was easier to label Emmons a liar than to explain away the confessions. And there was one story in Manson, in his own words, that stood out. One that may have rattled Charlie enough to later backpedal on the entire book. In the book, Manson claimed that in the pre-dawn hours of August 9, 1969, after Tex Watson and the others had left the house at Cielo Drive, leaving 5 people dead, including a pregnant woman, that Charlie allegedly went to the crime scene with another person to stage things. According to Emmons' book, Manson admitted he rearranged evidence, moving items around to confuse the police. There was mention of glasses left behind as a diversion, and a towel or pillowcase placed over Jay Sebring's head, though that detail is questionable, since Susan Atkins had earlier claimed she threw a towel over Sebring as she was leaving. The story suggested Manson was actively involved after the murders, not just as a possible mastermind, but as someone physically tampering with the scene. And that raises huge questions, because if true, Charlie wasn't just a conspirator at Cielo. He was an accessory after the fact. Worse, whoever went with him that night could also be named and tried. The reason for this alleged late-night visit? Manson was not certain the killers had done as told, wanted to verify it, and make sure evidence pointed to either the Black Panthers or other militants. This either was to fuel helter-skelter, the race war Charlie had prophesied, or to get another man, Bobby Beausoleil, out of jail. Beausoleil, a member of the Manson family, had killed a friend 2 weeks before and then got picked up by police on suspicion of the murder of Gary Hinman. Bobby had left evidence at the scene of Hinman's murder at Manson's instruction to implicate the Black Panthers. He left a bloody paw print near the body with the words, also scrawled in blood, of political piggy. But when Charlie and his partner allegedly went to Cielo Drive to make sure similar evidence was left, they found none, nor did they leave any. The crime scene at Cielo Drive never included any references to militants or Black people like had been left at Gary Hinman's house 2 weeks earlier. If Manson really wanted to create the illusion of a Black Panther attack, wouldn't he have left similar clues? That inconsistency is still a puzzle today. So who was with Charlie that night if the story is true? It wouldn't have been Tex, Pat, Susan, or Linda. They'd already left and returned to Spawn Ranch, and they were notably exhausted. It wasn't Bobby Beausoleil, who was in jail for the Hinman murder before August 9th. Bruce Davis, someone Charlie was close to, was at Spawn Ranch, as was Steve Grogan, another robot for Manson. Could it have been one of those two men? So why don't I think it was any of them? Because all of them were convicted of murder long before Emmons' book came out. Linda Kasabian, of course, was the star witness. But who cares if he implicated one of the killers? They were already serving life sentences by the time the public read that Charlie and someone else might have gone to Cielo Drive. I hypothesize that it was someone not already serving time for the murder spree of 1969. Someone who could have faced serious charges and loss of freedom if they were to be implicated. One name that comes to mind is Nancy Pittman, known in the family as Brenda. Nancy was notably with Charlie when the killers drove back from Cielo Drive. The two were dancing nude in the moonlight together, according to testimony. Nancy was a wealthy Malibu girl turned family loyalist, someone who had proven her skill at burglary and lockpicking, even breaking into her own parents' house to steal fur coats, which later ended up on dune buggies. It was Nancy's theft of her mother's fur coats that inspired the so-called creepy crawls, those late-night home invasions where family members would sneak into houses, move furniture around, sometimes steal snacks or small valuables to pawn. Nancy later went on to help cover up another murder a few years after Charlie was sentenced for his crimes. She served time for that crime as accessory and married the man responsible for the murder of both James and Lauren Willett. Nancy, the former surfing socialite, never was implicated in the Tate LaBianca murders. She got out of prison, married her Aryan Brotherhood murdering boyfriend, moved to Napa Valley, and had 3 sons with him. But if Nancy Laura Pittman went back to Cielo with Charlie and helped stage that crime scene, she could still face charges as an accessory to more murders. And that's where it gets really interesting. If Manson confessed to Emmons that he went back to Cielo with someone, even without naming them, he may have effectively snitched. He might have opened the door to investigators to dig up that person's name and bring new charges. Manson, who always preached loyalty and absolute silence, could have accidentally outed an accomplice decades later. If he later realized what he'd done, no wonder he tried to discredit Emmons. For Charlie, there was nothing worse than being called a rat. But if you talk too much, if you spill a secret that puts another family member in legal jeopardy, you become exactly that. It's kind of poetic, or maybe pathetic, how everyone around this story had their own rat motives. Tom Snyder wanted a spectacle to boost his ratings. Newell Emmons wanted a fat payday and book sales, selling access to a convicted killer. Roger Ailes, whose later crimes at Fox News would dwarf this moment, orchestrated the deal with no moral concern about giving Manson a stage. And Charlie? Charlie, who hated informants, who called out snitches as the worst evil, might have been the biggest rat of them all, giving away just enough of the truth to threaten someone else's freedom, and then scurrying to blame Emmons when the heat turned up. That is the irony of Manson in his own words. You can call it confessional, you can call it manipulative, but you cannot deny that somewhere in those pages, Manson let something slip. And he would spend the rest of his life trying to walk it back.
And I seen a big fat dead rat.